So, a very warm welcome to all of you friends who are joining us here in the classroom and friends who are watching this session online. So, today we'll discuss uh, the paper 1 of UPSC Civil Services Examinations Mains 2025 that came. And we'll be discussing paper 2 in the subsequent session. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Abhishiekh Saxena and I'm the faculty for Public Administration Option. So, if you see the paper that is that was there in this year's exam, the one biggest takeaway that we can take up or we can learn from this year's paper was that it breaks the template logic. So many of you have been doing answer writing, many of you have practiced in the past, right? Are currently doing at various places, including many with me. So, and I've been saying this privately in conversations with students that I am in touch with directly, and more so at various public forums, that the template approach that has been peddled for a few years now by some people, by some experts, by some teachers can cost you very dearly in the exam. And this has happened this year in a far more profound way. Because the classical ways in which this template approach was being taught, that okay, this much you have to write in introduction, this is what you have to write in body, this is what you have to write in conclusion. And I mean, most of you are here and all of you would have seen the paper by now, right? And this approach completely goes out of the window, because the moment you saw certain questions, the questions were not such that you can actually apply and paste that copy paste kind of a logic with those templates, because the entire paper was conceptual. It focused heavily on interlinking. So if you see our discussions which have happened before, we have emphasized time and again on these very aspects when it comes to public administration. And the methodology, that you see a question, deduce the topic in the syllabus and dimension, and demarcate your periphery in terms of what you need to work with. There were no ready-made answers, ready-made intros that were working here. Right. So that is the biggest takeaway, that it dismantles, it completely rejects the template based approach. So people who don't have conceptual clarity, people who have not developed that interlinking abilities during their learning phase will would have struggled a lot in this paper. And that brings me to the second most commonly asked question regarding any question paper. Was the paper easy or was it difficult? My answer is that the paper was difficultly easy and easily difficult. Okay, and I'll qualify these things. Why difficultly easy? Because you see, the paper was of 400 marks, out of which you had to attempt 250 marks. So the pattern was pretty standard. Question number 1 and 5 compulsory with 5 subparts, 10 marks each. And question number 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 50 marks each with 3 subparts, each 20 plus 15 plus 50. So the difficulty lay in choosing the options. If you have chosen the options correctly, then the paper was very easy. But if you haven't chosen the options correctly, the paper was very difficult. Another learning that we get out of this paper is, or in general, the 2025 experience with public administration, is the coming up of new keywords and somewhat new ideas and new terms. By new keywords, I mean in certain questions you had a keyword called expand. Okay, so most of you who actually would have taken up a sort of a template based approach, that okay, what do you mean by, discuss, what do you mean by elucidate, elaborate, analyze, critically discuss, explain, comment, and you have failed to look beyond that. Then there was this bouncer, not so many, but in one or two questions, I guess. When I say new ideas, I mean that they are not new as such. It is that probably at most of the places those ideas are not taught. For example, there were things like new public governance, the interlinkages, and new terms. When it comes to this, there were certain ideas that were twisted in terminology. For example, the question on administrative law, being a system of administration under the law. It was nothing but significance of administrative law, right? So the boiling down of a question, breaking it down to the dimension that remains very critical. And that criticality sort of reached its epoch in this year's paper. Also, the questions were long read. There were certain questions which were really long. They are always there. But this time the numbers were high. So in a way, with the introduction of terms, new keywords, UPSC this time has expanded the sort of scope of the subject for the examination, right? New terms, for example, the media question, next, right? So many of you, UPSC doesn't expect, we don't expect, none of us are sort of Shashi Tharoors when it comes to our vocabulary with English. So how do you interpret such questions? For those of you who know Hindi, because there is a Hindi translation given, you still have some sort of a recourse to fall back upon, at least make some sense of it, right? But those of you who do not know it, then there is a problem, right? So these things actually made this year's paper unique. Another very interesting aspect which came at a very heightened level this year, it's always there, always the paper, every question, like I've always been saying, is a test of a concept. But this year there were heavy emphasis on perspectives. Often while answering a question, it is stressed that you should add various perspectives in the answer. This time UPSC turned the table. It gave multi-dimensional perspectives in the question itself. So the challenge was twofold. It was not just answering the question, but also collecting, harmonizing, organizing all those perspectives in the answer. Right. Also, I want to highlight another important point. You would have seen the GS papers, right? In GS paper, you have a 10 marker and a 15 marker. Largely, this is the scenario. And you have word limits specified, right? This has been the trend for quite some time now. I'm just emphasizing it, especially for folks who were attempting the paper first time and who would attempt the paper going forward in next year. So question number 1 and 5, if you look at the original paper, has word limits mentioned. But question number 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 do not. You only decide the word limit as per discretion. So you can take the liberty of 25, 30 words here and there, at least, provided the space allows you, because we have a fixed answer booklet. So that is something that you need to play with. There is nothing about public administration right in this. It is the part of your strategy, how you actually act on ground at the time of the examination. That can make a lot of difference. So, when you look at the paper, that is why I'm saying it was difficultly easy and easily difficult. Because for people who got these basics right, the ABC of public administration right, could have very easily and handsomely, attempted the paper. So if you see the first paper, the marks can easily be scored around 130 to 160. It can be anywhere. 160, of course, will be the B height of it. But the point is that you can reach the score, right? And I'm reasonably confident that a lot of our students are going to do that this year. For folks who are joining me online, they can ask their queries through the chat section, which is available in the interface. For those of you who are here, you can ask me questions directly. So, after this sort of a mirror to the exam, let us have a look at the questions, and we'll be moving in a sequential manner. This is not a teaching session. We are going to look at the various aspects that we had to take care while writing the examination. I will draw upon the interlinkages, concepts that have been involved. So, interestingly, in front of you right now is a slide that actually breaks down the paper out of 400 marks. The importance of various units that have come. Many of you would recall what, those of you who were writing this exam, and I can see many people here, familiar names that have been here, that while talking about the exam, the then forthcoming examination, you told me that, okay, sir, what all the topics we should study. And I talked about the significance of administrative law, most importantly, which has become the talk of the town, is something that I laid emphasis on: NPM. That do study NPM, it will come. Do study NPM, it will come. And see, even I was not expecting that you'll have 3 questions on NPM, involving NPM in one manner or the other. So this distribution is very essential, because this distribution tells us that out of 400, how the various units fare. And as expected, which everybody knows, that first three units are very important, and the corresponding marks, if you see, demonstrate that. But a surprise here was accountability, control, and administrative law. CPA was standard, organization pretty much standard, a bit, might be thinking I'm doing an election kind of an analysis, that how many seats here and how many seats there. But the point here is that these were the big surprises. Personnel administration regarding ethics, administrative ethics, I have talked about time and again that these things are important. But the point here is that the administrative law and accountability and control is basically eating on financial administration in a big way and other topics in small bites to arrive at this much score. Roughly, they were around 30 every year. So, this is a jump, and that is a lesson. The lesson that no unit is less important, that no unit is less important. Public policy, very vanilla, 25, roughly around 2025. This has been there. So, this has been a stable frontier. So, even if you analyze the PYQs, which we try and do during our various programs, whether it is Q&A, whether it is foundation, whether it is PYQ. So, the point here is that you can find those places of stability in these units. And by emphasizing on those places of stability, you can attempt the exam well. And you can hedge your risks against the surprises. Okay. So this is a key learning here. This distribution will help you analyze your strengths and weaknesses, that which units you are good at and which units you need to work more. Okay. So now let's get into the thick of the game, the questions. So there was this first question that was asked, and this question, if you see, is about public choice approach. Imperfect market and political factors limit the application of public choice approach. Explain. So the idea, if you look at this particular question, we are referring to the unit of introduction, the topic of public choice approach, and the dimension is critical. Basically, we are criticizing that there can be certain factors which are limiting the application of public choice approach. What are those factors? There can be many factors. But the question is asking us to focus on imperfect market and political factors. So, whenever you are reading a question, the deduction of the core demand, I don't have to talk about everything that I know related to PCA because it's a 10 marker. I have limited space, limited time. I have to be like a surgeon. I cannot be a butcher here, right? So I'll have to take that scalpel and make a very small incision in the entire edifice of public choice approach and bring out what I need for this particular answer. And at a broad level, they are talking about the twofold limitations that can, or challenges that public choice approach can encounter, that is imperfect market and the political factors. We all know that public choice approach is about using the economic logic in the administration, market logic, right? Or we can say the marketization of the administration. views of Niskanen, others are very relevant here. So how do we actually go about this particular question? You see, Tulloch, Niskanen can be your flag bearers in this answer. Of course, Anthony Downs can be used. Ostrom can be used. Right. So these will be the critical scholars that you will be using. Also, when you are talking about public choice approach, we are using the logic of a rational choice. And rational choice for public, right? In terms of various options. So electoral behavior can be one way. Okay. And in the political and the market imperfections, we'll have to use the logic of social choice. Okay. Within the state, there can be again various factors. So, to bring about this answer, we'll have to first contextualize the question. See, that is very important because by proper contextualization, by that I do not mean necessarily always a definition or a quote. If by reading first 3-4 lines of your questions, I am able to understand that you have understood the questions and you know what to do about it, right? I am more favorably disposed. So to begin with, we'll have to talk about that how the basic idea of public choice approach is about the marketization of the administration. But it can get constrained by certain market limitations. Those market limitations, if you see, can be reflected through various aspects. Okay. The basic idea can be information asymmetry. Because people do not know, people do not have the information to evaluate the choices. At the same time, the free rider problem, the free rider issues that are there can be external factors. For example, right now, the Trump trade factor, the trade tariffs, they can compromise, which are beyond the sovereign control of one nation, global wars, pandemic, and then the transaction cost itself. Something might be available, but at a too high a price. Similarly, there can be political factors. Political factors like populism, freebies, some decisions, some ideas which might be too risky politically. Because politicians are what? The criticism, centered, vote maximizers, bureaucrats, empire builders. In this background only the public choice approach emerges. But the state continues, the bureaucracy continues. So it might be held hostage to those populist, self-centered tendencies. There can be corruption, rigid laws, institutional rigidities, as well as the politico-cultural constraints. Now, you look at farm loan waivers, subsidies on electricity, right? They make public sector undertakings inefficient in spite of reforms. Okay. In this, James Buchanan gives a very important concept of politics without romance. Politics without romance. So all these ideas have to be synthesized. And then we can say that yes, public choice approach exposed the inefficiencies of the then prevailing administrative systems. But it must stay true to the context in which it is used. The contextualization is very important to shield from the factors limiting its applicability. Right? Adequate mechanisms should be taken and should be rooted in the socio-economic, cultural, and political realities of the country or of the area in which it is being applied. For example, if today I do something with nuclear energy, it is not a very politically market sensitive matter, not so much. But if I do it with oil and diesel prices, right, it will raise eyebrows, won't it? So this contrast has to be shown. Therefore, the public choice approach has to be contextually rooted. Okay. So that is the learning for this question, that public choice approach continues to remain a very important tool to tide over as well as highlight the government inefficiencies. But it must be used contextually. Okay. So this is how you will be able to address this particular question. So Narendran is asking, like I gave the example of Buchanan. If you look at the free rider logic and all those logics have been given by Niskanen, Tulloch, Downs, Ostrom. You'll read the theory. So while using those logic, try and use these scholars of public choice approach. Okay. So let's move to the next question. The fine art of decision making is not making decisions that others can make. Now, if you look at this particular question, easy, we are looking at administrative behavior unit. The topic is decision making. Now, the moment you see this topic, right, just this, immediately one person's appears in your mind that okay, it is decision making, it must be Simon, right? But it is not Simon. Simon can be used as a second order argument. So those who have used Simon straight away, you have sort of lost some leverage. It is not incorrect. Let me emphasize, it is not incorrect. But you have lost some leverage because before Simon, there were people who talked about decision making like Drucker, right? You can also use Barnard, functions of executive. So the core idea in this statement is emblematic of, it is not quoting Drucker exactly, but this is emblematic of Drucker's view. If you have not actually gone into this, that we are looking at the strategic and routine decisions. This question is based on that. So Drucker says that decisions are of two types, strategic and unique. So the decision making has to focus here. This is what the question means actually. Right? Then you can use Simon's logic of programmed and non-programmed decision to reflect. that the decision making, the significance of decision making is using non-programmed decisions, because those have greater implications. So the essence was this: if you have not been able to decode this, you will be simply parroting Simon's line, right? And that can actually cost you some marks, not all. See, the usage of programmed and non-programmed, I am again emphasizing, is not incorrect, but it is a second level argument. So once you have identified the concept and the dimension, it is very easy to write. The decision making is at the heart of organization. Many scholars have said this, you can quote anyone, right? It is one of the most critical activity. In fact, people like Simon are equating decision making with the organization. That organization is nothing but decision making, a series of decisions. Bernard, consciously coordinated activities. What are these? Series of decisions. So the point here is this, that when the decision making that others can make is not in making decisions that others can make, that means the importance of the strategic decision making. Okay. So how, as per Drucker's view, the top executive makes certain decisions while delegate the lesser important ones to the lower levels in the organization. Here you could have used the principle of subsidiarity, second ARC, linkage, span of control argument. See, I'm giving you a bouquet. The idea is that if in the exam you can use few flowers out of those bouquet in a well organized manner, you would have satisfied the examiner. Okay? Because when we talk about span of control, we talk about that how span of control, the effectiveness of span of control withers away when there are too many subordinates. Okay? Simon, again, not just program and non-program, but invoking the bounded rationality argument. Okay? So, the answer was fairly easy. If you look at from the functions of the executive needs to formalize the process, formulate the process, and maintain the organizational balance. That means most of the decisions that executive will not take. He will only take the strategic decisions, linking or pinning it up to the central argument around Drucker. Okay. So to begin with, we'll have to talk about that how decision making, please come, is at the heart of the organization. And within that heart, the key component is that strategic decision making, that non-programmed decision making. Okay. And we can use these concepts to build up our analysis. And then we can talk about, because he's talking about art, that means we'll have to involve the role of manager or the leader. That a leader is sort of not known by the number of decisions he make, but by the choice of the right ones that he makes. Okay. So fairly easy question. Fairly easy question. For example, the prime minister would not, work on rotation of security forces. He'll work on broader matters of policy, right? National security, not transfers of operations, officials. Okay, understood? All right. Let's move to 1C. Has the media nixed its role in holding the government accountable and ensuring transparency? Argue. That means has it or has it not? Argue. So we'll have to come up with a balance between the two. Some points where it has done that, some points where it hasn't done that. So now if you look at this particular question, can you tell me which unit does it belong to? Arey bhai, unit is accountability and control. The role of media. Okay, someone has a query, I guess. Yes, Neelam is right. Okay, so we are looking at the role of media. Now, media is what? Fourth pillar of democracy, or more commonly known as fourth estate. And which role are we talking about when we say holding the governments accountable and for their transparency? That means we are looking at a watchdog role of the media, right? So if you look at the second ARC report, it has emphasized upon disinformation, myth busting, fact checking, right? Citizen centric administration report I am talking about. In that, it mentions the role of media, right? As well as the first report on RTI, significant for transparency and democratic accountability. Why are we talking about this? Because we are in the governance era where media is a strong constituent of one of the three key pillars of this governance approach: state, market, and civil society, to hold the government accountable, right? So, while looking at this question, if you could not understand the meaning of the word next, then it is a problem. Next would mean compromised, right? Even if you don't understand the meaning of the word next, look at the Hindi translation. Even if you don't know Hindi, try and be a judge in terms of feeling. Doesn't next as a word is closer to jinxed? Negative. Negative. So overall, I can make a sense of the question even if I might not know the substance of the word. That okay, we are talking about something that is critical to media. Okay. In this, you can invoke Habermas public sphere idea. Habermas's public sphere idea that media is an agent that facilitates deliberation and transparency. And at the heart of it, because we are questioning media, it is having several sub-threads: the commercial factors, the TRP race, the political capture, right? We talk no Pappu media, Godi media, don't use these terms in the answer, but the idea, the political capture as well as the commercial capture versus the true democratic role that the media has to play, being the fourth pillar or being the fourth estate. So we'll have to contextualize this, that media is the fourth estate, crucial for accountability and transparency. But of lately, there have been certain questions, certain criticism. And to that end, our answer will be based on three parts. Has it compromised? Yes or no? Has it compromised certain points? Has not certain points? What is the way forward? Now, please When I mean what is the way forward, I do not want you to write WAY forward, underline it. The idea is that these will be the three pillars of your answer. You know, so whether we talk about the role, the investigative journalism, transparency promotion through RTIs, through highlighting the issues of public and the state and government's apathy, right? And how it helps in bringing about a deliberative democracy in the public sphere, paper mass and all those things. The compromise or the next factor will be based on the commercialization, the political capture, fake news, disinformation, right? And the due to the populism, the transfer from true journalism to more of an entertainment, right? At the same time, you will provide how this has not been jinxed. You can talk about, don't talk about any Indian scam, talk about Panama Papers. Panama Papers was in news, right? But at the same time, you can talk about the paid news, the paid interviews, the paid campaign, and how in the modern light, in the modern day, in the contemporary age, other platforms like social media, etc., are acting as a check against this very aspect. Okay. Also, there are other institutional measures in India, for example, the press council, etc. We are not talking about regulating the media by the government. We are talking about strengthening the self-regulation by Press Council of India, etc. Okay, so those can come up as solution. Fairly easy question this was, provided you have understood and you have broken down the question in its right context. Got it? Okay. So let us move to the next one. Is Herbert Simon justified in criticizing some principles of administration? Principles of administration, immediately it should ring a bell. The principal era, the SMT CMT era, the universalization, the principal building era, as proverbs. This is a critique which is available in every book. This is a critique with everyone tells you. But is he justified? Yes or no? Right? Yes would be, you will take the Simon's argument that are there. So we are looking at the unit of administrative thought. We are looking at the unit of administrative thought. And while looking at administrative thought, the question is very simple. Because Simon was heavily critical of the classicals, and he says that these were the heuristic principles. They were self-contradictory, right? Unity of command, span of control. Simon takes so many arguments to say that these are merely proverbs. They are contradictory, vague, heuristic, general observations. Okay? So this question, if you see, did not had a lot of so-called surprises, right? The classical principles, but then we would say that yes, Simon was justified to a certain extent, but it is not that these principles are completely irrelevant, because the present day administrative systems continue to reflect these principles in one way or the other, right? But with modified or modifications as per the context, right? So very easy question this ways, and this is also a repetition. Same question, similar question on proverbs have been asked before. Okay, so fairly easy. So I won't get into the depths of it. All right. Yes, Neelam. Okay, so this is a fairly easy question. Next one. Now this is where the cake is. Administrative law has evolved from the need. Evolved. That means we are looking at an evolutionary perspective of administrative law to create a system of public administration under law. That means earlier we were looking at administrative law under the larger ambit of public law, right? It has evolved from this and has acquired a separate substantive character. If you see, exactly this question has been given in a test series of mine, wherein we have talked about that administrative law has evolved into a separate discipline. The idea is the same. We are looking at the evolution and significance of administrative law. So this evolutionary aspect was very, critical to dissect, because if you have forgotten this and you have only emphasized upon this, then you are actually cooking half the cake, not the full of it. It has evolved. Initially, it was under the ambit of public law. The basic utility and significance of administrative law remains to keep the discretion, arbitrariness of the administration under check. Okay, it's a restrictive in character. But the point here is it has evolved. So many things have now been subsumed under the umbrella of administrative law. It is not just about delegated legislation. It is also about tribunals. It is also about constitutionalism. So, from the initial bud that was here in the public law, just to restrict, it has grown in substantive proportions that way. So, this aspect has to be very, very clearly brought about. And the juice of this question was only in this aspect, that whether you have been able to decode that we are talking about actually the evolution of administrative law from being a subset of public law to its own distinct, unique identity. I'm not saying it is outside public law now, but the idea is that it has acquired so much details, so much wealth of its own, that it requires a separate study, distinct emphasis. So this is what I am referring in this particular argument. So you will use principles of natural justice, judicial review, okay, droit administratif, because you have to show this evolutionary perspective, okay. And a good idea would be to actually draw this, draw a figure like this, because it clearly will show that it has evolved, and you can put it under a scope like this, that how it has evolved administrative law under public law to a distinct identity. Here add the various dimensions that have made the administrative law far more substantive, far more wholesome, right? And there you can, here you can pin down the reasons for this. So this one diagram will explain the examiner that you understood the idea pretty well. Okay. So from dicey that no separate administrative law is needed, only just the concept of rule of law, to the expansion because of the coming up of welfare state. In India, you can use the examples whether of Keswanand Bharti case. In a parallel logic, you can take India as a case study. From Keswanand Bharti case to rights-based approaches, to delegated legislation, tribunals, RTI Act, so many things can be covered in this. Okay, because the relationship, administrative law operates in a zone which marks the relationship between the state and the society. So initially administrative law was dismissed to be separate. It was just a small shred under the public law. But France develops droit administratif, right? And the welfarist era leads to further expansion, and the governance era leads to further consolidation. And you can take examples, like I said, from Keswanand Bharati, from Raj Narayan case, right? The right-based approaches now, the RTI, and so on and so forth. Basically, all of these things are part of the larger ambit of the study of administrative law. How you are curbing at the core is administrative discretion or administrative excesses. How you are checking that. Okay. So, in this logic, you have to understand this particular question. Okay. Are we clear on this, friends? Are we clear? Right. All right. So, this was the first question. Moving to the next one, and here comes the NPM. Now, obviously it's NPM, so we are referring to unit of introduction. Topic is NPM, right? But it is referring to a new concept, new public governance. Read the question very clearly. NPM has actually been a transitionary state. That means NPM was somewhere in between in the evolution from traditional public administration, that is TPA, to what is here called new public governance. So basically, you have to show this journey, emphasize on the transitionary character, and prove that it was indeed transitionary, and the final outcome here is new public governance. New public governance. So, if you see here, we'll use the classical theory, Weber, etc. Right? And when we see new public governance, we see collaborative, cooperative, interactive sort of a governance model. Okay? And here in between NPM, we'll use Hood, Osborne, and Gabler. Right? The idea of NPM steering, not rowing. Okay, you can use Dendhart and Dendhart's new public service approach as somewhere here, new public service approach, marking the transition. Okay, marking this transition. So to begin with, you'll have to contextualize that public administration has not been a static discipline. It is ecological in character, and its doctrine have evolved over a period of time. from traditional hierarchical Weberian structures to a more collaborative, cooperative, interactive ideas like new public governance, with NPM playing a significant transitionary role. Okay, and draw diagrams like this in the examination. Okay, we'll have to link that. We'll have to link that. But let us not distract ourselves right now with good governance, because the question is very, very specific when it comes to these transitions. So let's not adulterate it with other concepts. Yes, in reality, all of these things are happening in tandem. Okay, but while writing answers, we'll have to be very, very restrictive. We'll have to keep our blinders on, that we do not adulterate it with other aspects. Okay. So if you see why this evolution would have happened, because NPM had certain limitations. There were limitations of NPM, neglect of public accountability, because NPM was inward, within the government. It was not outside, right? So the public character of public administration got somewhere blurred in the NPM. And to retain that public character, or to sort of revive that public character, paradigms like, or ideas like new public governance comes. Citizens lost the voice. They were relegated as clients or customers. Okay. And the practical thread can be license Raj, liberalization, PPP, to more citizen centric and participative approach. Okay, so that is the idea. Now, if you see, the new public governance is characterized by these: collaborative, people sensitive, value laden approach to public administration. That is at the heart of new public governance. Why new? Public, governance means multi-actor. Public would mean a public character, collaborative, deliberative, participative. New because there was an old public governance. Okay, so that is the broad idea when you look at this. So to begin with, you'll have to contextualize, like I said, this evolution, and then you will have to talk about how, as a reaction to those limitations, NPM came about. But NPM also had its limitations. It brought about efficiency and effectiveness, or rather sought to brought about efficiency and effectiveness at the cost of equity and public participation, because of the excessive reliance on the market methods and contracts. Therefore, you see, in countries like India, reforms in light of NPM, the privatization, liberalization, outsourcing, received a substantial societal backlash, because the public was not consulted. The public character of public administration got lost in the NPM era. And therefore, these shortcomings of NPM brought about the new public governance. Right? It is not just about the government or market, government and market. It is more about the networks. New public governance is nothing but we are identifying with the traditional concepts of governance and good governance, a multi-actor paradigm. And therefore, because from here to here, the publicness of public administration has increased. While this gave the structure, the body, this gave the soul. And this was a transitionary phase. Okay. So the NPM state was not an end state. Okay. But it laid the ground for new public governance, and more so in the light of varying challenges on technology, on globalization, citizens' demand, change citizen expectations. This is a more suitable model. All right. Yes. Yes, Neelam, very right. चलिए जी, next one. 2B. Mary Parker Foley. Now, Foley pioneered the evolution of socio-psychological approach. Clearly, we are looking at the unit of thought. The subtopic is dynamic administration. Foley. Clear? Approach to the study of organization. Explain. What is the root of Foley, if you see? Root of Foley. Group dynamics. Also considering the human factor. That means group means social. Human factor here would mean the psychological. Now, built upon this, the concepts that Foley has given, law of interpenetration, law of situation, okay, circular response, power with over power over, okay, and you can use further scholars of the socio-psychological approach, Bernard, Mayo of human relations, McGregor, Likart, etc. And the importance of informal organizations and the importance of informal organizations. Okay, so we have to just explain how Foley's work actually was rooted in the socio-psychological approach and it helped the study of organization, right? Marking a departure from the traditional mechanistic, right, classical structural approach, right? Fair enough. Using these concepts, we'll have to do this. All of these things, law of situation, interpenetration, circular response, authority, power over, power with ideas, they will come. Okay. Easy question that way, not very difficult. It is just the phrasing which might look intimidating this way. We have to encapsulate Foley's work. Remember, I haven't talked about conflict resolution and integration here. You can skip that, and if you want, you can just give a passing reference. Okay, nothing is spectacular is needed on the conflict resolution because there are conflicts which happen, and classicals resolve it through domination, etc. But the point here is, if you are going to make the conflict the basis, it is going to hijack the agenda. The agenda is how this group and human aspect, social and psychological aspect, the emphasis on group dynamics, and through these ideas, she is approaching the study of organization. She is amongst the first. You can use that classical line that is coming from your soul, the bridge between the classicals and the human school. Okay, so that can be done, but very important to contextualize the idea, right, in terms of how Foley was somewhere ahead of her times. And this is a very standard sort of an argument, and he used the psychological idea. Now fill in those words, that the core focus of his analysis was group dynamics, and through those group interactions she identifies various aspects prevailing in the organization, because everybody will write ahead of her times bridge argument. So qualify that a bit, and then you can substantively expand in the body and sort of conclude, right? one of the earliest scholars to actually bring the psychology and sociology into the study of administration. Next, NPM again. So, while we are looking at NPM, is the question belonging to Unit 1? No. Under the new public management framework, public private partnerships challenges the entropy of closed and open models of organization. Focus is on models of organization. We are viewing it through PPP. NPM is just providing the outer cladding. So, the zeroing down is very important. This question belongs to the unit of organization. Subtopic is PPP and the interlinked topic is NP. It is not a question directly on NP. Okay. So, there are two, three things that are involved. First, it is talking about entropy of open and closed system. That means you need to actually look at the concept of open and closed system in or through PPP, right? What is there? It is transactionalism, right? So here you can use cats and Khan, open system, right? Examples again would be bot, boot, uh, other examples, VGF, those things will be used as examples and support. Okay. What is the central demand here? The central demand here is that how PPPs under NPM blur the lines between the closed bureaucratic system and open system of organization. This is the demand. If you haven't understood what is the demand, no point even reaching here. You will not be able to cobble up an answer. So the PPP has sort of blurred, okay, challenges the entropy of closed and open system. It has blurred the lines between what was understood to be a closed system, cats and Khan, open system, okay, in terms of how bureaucratic organizations are closed, not permeable, not open to outside, whereas PPP, the private organizations are open, okay, challenging their entropy. Entropy here would mean their rigidity, predictability, because open systems have a certain kind of behavior which is predictable, so is closed system. So how PPP lies somewhere in the middle, okay. So the closed system, what is the example? Weberian. Open system, simple example. How can you simplify? You can simply use systems approach. You can simply use the systems approach. Okay. So how will you begin that? You will talk about that there was a classical way of working, TPA, which had flaws, which led to the coming up of NPM. Okay. A bit confusing, right? And PPP is one of the most significant manifestations of NPM, blurring the lines between open and closed systems. Closed, classical, open. Got it? So this way you will have to put that PPP emerges as one of the most profound manifestation, the hallmark of the NPM. Then take up the models, closed and open, define them, talk about them, right? And bring out the PPP characteristics and how PPP as a challenge to these very closed model. Okay? And challenge in a way to the open model, the purely open model. Because purely open model will drive on efficiency, effectiveness and profit, not on public good. Not on public good. Okay? So they have contractual obligations, they are completely fluid, flexible, and this adds to the complexity and challenge. And then take up examples of PPP, whether in infra, whether in healthcare, to balance the both arguments. Okay, understood. So this was question number 2. Any queries from this particular question or any of the ones that we have discussed before? You can use systems approach. I don't think contingency would be required here. Moniz, not necessarily a way forward. You can give a concluding statement because it is analyzed that ways that NPM and PPP sort of represents a hybrid, right? It represents a hybrid organization kind of an approach that disrupt the idealistic conceptualizations that are associated with the closed as well as open models and come up with a far more realistic manifestation of the organization that is neither fully bureaucratic nor fully open, but rather more functional and effective, right? And this is a precursor to the network governance. That kind of a forward looking argument can be given. All right. Now let us move to the third question. In conflict situations in organization, leadership migrates to the aggressive and relegate the emotionally matured to the background. Discuss. Now we are looking at theories of leadership. Unit is administrative behavior. Unit is administrative behavior. So here you will be using one, Fiedler, two, Blake and Mouton. At the same time, the idea of transformational leadership. Okay, transformational leadership or transformational, rather transformational versus transactional leadership. Okay, Fiedler, you will use task versus relationship orientation. That is what I am saying. Okay, because from migrates to the aggressive and relegates the emotionally matured. So you will have to use the task versus relationship idea, right? You can use Foley integration since we have talked about conflict, right? And Hersey and Blanchard with regards to the situational aspect, because we are using, the question is saying that we are looking at a conflicting situation. Thank you. We are looking at a conflicting situation. So the central demand is to analyze this shift of leadership to aggressive individuals during conflict. Whenever there is a time of crisis, a leader rises. That is what we talk about, the transformational leadership. So at the heart of it, this, but it undermines the emotionally mature leadership. Okay, the emotionally mature leadership. So to begin with, you'll have to talk about how conflict is inevitable in an organization, and the response of the leadership defines the defines the outcomes. You need aggressive leadership in conflict because conflict is a crisis. You need to show decisiveness, strength. Okay. Therefore, when we see the situational theories, we see whenever there is a crisis, leadership becomes authoritarian. Right? Then, like I said, you can use the models, whether Fiedler, whether Blake and Mouton, and the idea of transformational leadership. Okay? Because the transformational leadership brings about immediate or quick results to solve the crisis. However, it relegates the matured managers to the margins. To signify the importance of the matured manager, use Foley integration, the win-win situation. But in times of crisis, it might not always be suited. It might not always be suited. So, for example, you are going on GST. GST Council would need consensus, right? So you can adopt a win-win kind of an approach. But what if there is an emergency situation like COVID? You need the transformational leadership. So this is how you will define the examples and deal with the central idea or central problem of the question. But do remember that you caution and balance. The transformational leadership does provide quick solutions, but they might not be long enduring. Whereas the mature leadership provides sustainability, okay, and long term idea. Moving on, the foundations of public administration, new public management, and public governance rests on rule of law. Discuss. Now tell me, where does this question actually belong? Is it introduction or administrative law? Anji, friends online. The question actually belongs to administrative law. The question actually belongs to administrative law. You are looking at secondary linkages in introduction. Tell me how you are viewing this idea. Are you viewing these aspects or these various forms of public administration through rule of law, or rule of law is being viewed through them? The former or the latter? The former or the latter? You are viewing these ideas through rule of law. You are not viewing rule of law through them. Understand the difference. You are viewing these ideas with the lens of rule of law, not the otherwise. Okay, you are trying to find rule of law in all of this. You are not trying to find NPM, public governance, in rule of law. Therefore, the question belongs to administrative law and not introduction unit. Yes, we are using concepts of introduction unit, so it will come as a secondary topic. But your focus should be based on rule of law. That means we are looking at the concept of rule of law, and the moment the concept of rule of law has come, enters the gentleman called Dicey. A.V. Dicey. And when we are looking at these concepts, we are looking at this is also an evolution, an increasing citizen perspective or citizen centricity. So this increasing citizen centricity can only be brought about through this paradigm academically, but in reality based on rule of law. Otherwise, you cannot do it. This is the crux of the question. है ना? Always break it down. Always break it down. Now, how will you ensure rule of law from a citizen perspective? What are the tools? Judicial review, writs, independent regulation. All of these are products of NPM and public governance and the public administration in general. Judicial review has always been there. But how citizen centricity has been brought about? Because of rule of law. Writs always been there. Regulation, a phenomena of as an offshoot of NPM and modern day governance. PPP, RTI, all those things. So you will have to define, you will have to put in the context the centrality and vitality of rule of law to the public administration and modern day governance. In the traditional era, it was marked by legality, hierarchy. In the NPM era, it was marked by regulation, contractualism, PPP. In the public governance era, the legitimacy, the social imprint of the network, collaboration, participative approach. Okay, safeguards, rights, and therefore rule of law remains a sort of a common denominator in all of these, a bit manifesting in different forms, right? So this would be the modus operandi if we see the question. Understood? Got it? Chaliye, next. The principles of checks and balances count among the most fundamental constitutional values. Comment. Tell me, what is a question of paper 2 philosophical framework is doing in paper 1? Which unit? Huh? Accountability and control. Very good. The unit is accountability and control. And the basis is the very concepts of accountability and control. The basis is the very concepts of accountability and control. Okay. So doctrine of checks and balances, basic Indian polity 101, separation of powers. Okay. The various organizations, CAG, public account committees, various organizations and various forums, right? Judicial review, all those things will be utilized here as part of the answer. It's a 10 mark, it's a 15 marker. Okay. So why the concepts of checks and balance is fundamental constitutional value? Because without check and balance, everything else will go for a toss. Everything else will go for a toss. So we'll have to put in context the vitality, the significance, the importance of checks and balances and locate it in the light of constitutionalism and democracy as a check against arbitrary exercise of power. So a bit of the hue of administrative law also coming into the picture. Okay, as well as a huge inspiration from paper 2, right? Philosophical and constitutional framework, because there we also talk about constitutionalism. Okay, so see how UPSC is wreaking havoc when it comes to this. Seems a very easy question. This seems a very easy question, but the nuances in that, because you have to draw from administrative law, paper 2, right? And then the examples, all of these are examples which are in India, which are in United States judicial review, and all those things. Obviously you will give the example of CHE, Keswanand Bharti, etc. So to contextualize this, you'll have to talk about vitality. You can use the classical argument of Montesquieu. Okay, the spirit of laws. Montesquieu's spirit of laws, right? And how, take Indian example, Indian constitution represents a synthesis, a balance, doctrine of separation of powers and doctrine of checks and balances. Through the examples, you will have to talk about how it is a constitutional value to maintain the accountability and control over the administration. Okay, so it is not just a mechanism, it is a cardinal value. You can include other nations examples as well. So somebody has asked, can we include other nations examples? You can include, no harm in that, as long as you are maintaining the conceptual sanity of the answer. But Indian example would be far more relatable, easy to give, right? If you have that, I mean, impeachment is very much there in United States, right? Who knows, Trump might be impeached, right? At the same time, I mean, you can take example, judicial review is there. Okay, so doctrine of checks and balances you will largely find in every democratic republican system, but the Indian example is best suited because you easily know it. Okay, no harm in giving those examples. Moving on, fourth one, delegated legislation should be clear and should confine to the limits determined by the legislature. In light of the statement, explain how misuse of administrative discretion can be checked. By at the heart of it, it is administrative law, delegated legislation, and within delegated legislation, the challenges of delegated legislation. Now, please don't write general notes here. We are referring to the misuse of discretion. So, within this challenges is the misuse of discretion, right? Changing the very spirit and substance of the law that was intended. Exactly similar question has been given in our test series. Okay. Now, when you look at this particular question, you will have to use the arguments like sunset clauses, doctrine of reasonableness, proportionality, right? Dicey's idea of legislative supremacy, importance of delegation, the need and the importance of delegation. Okay. and why there needs to be a clarity so as to prevent the administration from crossing its boundaries or transgressing its boundaries so as to not destroy the spirit and substance of the law as it was intended. As it was intended. So, to begin with, you will contextualize the necessity, importance of delegated legislation and the risk that it is prone to misuse. Okay, in the very first paragraph, you will set the agenda that okay, I know the in and out of this question and I am highlighting, showing a glimpse of all of it, right? It is prone to misuse due to great amount of administrative discretion. It's a law made by the executive and you know that kind of a logic. So there should be clear rules and regulation because vague delegation opens up the window for great amount of discretion, right, and opens up the scope for administrators to undermine the intent of the law. Use dicey his suspicions about delegated legislation undermining the parliamentary control. Okay, cite case laws. Supreme Court of India in Delhi Laws Act case 1951 said that delegated legislation is a necessity but cannot be abdicated. Responsibility cannot be abdicated. How this misuse gets manifested? In arbitrary orders, colorable exercise, doctrine of colorable legislation, drawing inspiration from that. Don't mention the doctrine directly. Okay. How orders can be colored without guidelines. Misuse in preventive detention laws, emergency situations. You see how during COVID when the mask mandates came, ultimately all the restrictions that were imposed, they were imposed under the NDMA Act, National Disaster Management Authority, right? That on the mask there will be 2000 rupees fine. So let us say you are a normal boy, loitering in your colony, just went out to fetch groceries, and a pathological there is this beat constable who has a pathological hatred for you. Hey, this guy is bad. Unnecessarily, hey, idhara, where is your mask? Right, and you are wearing mask, but it is slightly off due to the load that you are carrying. Hey, fine, though, 2000 rupee fine. We'll fine you to misuse. Okay. How you can strengthen this through the committee system, right? Procedural controls like pre-legislative consultation, transparency through RTI, right? So the delegation is to strengthen efficiency without undermining the accountability, without undermining the accountability. It is not a license of discretion. Okay. All right. Should we move to the next one? Next one, understood? 4B. Leadership is not only about taking credit for success, but also owning up and being accountable for failures. Elucidate. See, this might actually seem a very generic question, right? The primary unit is administrative behavior, leadership. Easy? There is a secondary unit in this, that is accountability and control. Taking the responsibility, right? So you have to adopt that accountability dimension from the unit of accountability and control. Again here, transformational leadership, because transformational leadership is giving credit to the team, to the subordinates, right? Whereas transactional leadership will only give credit if he gets credit. Same dimension being, same concept being repeated but with other dimension. Okay, you can use Bernard, right? Feedback mechanism, a bit from personal feedback mechanisms, a bit from administrative law, oh sorry, administration, personnel administration. So leadership is dual responsibility. While celebrating the achievements, but more importantly, owning up the responsibility for failures. So there is an ethical dimension of leadership that is being highlighted. That is being highlighted. So leadership is not just about power, but also about, or more so about, responsibility. More so about responsibility. Okay. So while Bernard says that leaders are responsible for organizational equilibrium, it also includes assuming responsibility for mistakes, unlike the classicals who were merely emphasizing on the charisma or the authority. And through this, bring in the transformational leadership, the ethical leadership idea. Okay. So then use examples. For example, Shastri ji volunteering to resign after a railway accident when he was the Minister of Railways in Panditji's ministry, right? So these aspects of theories of leadership, traditional as well as modern, because you'll have to contextualize between the, you'll have to differentiate between the traditional, the charisma, the trait driven approaches, and to the modern ones. Okay, the transformational leadership. So that way is easy question if you can deduce the transformational leadership idea. Any queries so far? Any queries? Because we are almost at the end of the first half of the paper, right? Please do write in those in the message box. Next, bureaucracy constitutes the imaginary state and is the spiritualism of the state. Explain. Now, this is a statement which was given by Marx. Obviously, no bets for guessing that we are referring to the unit of administrative thought, Weber, right? Max Weber. Now, what is this? Bureaucracy constitutes imaginary state and is the spiritualism of the state. That means we are emphasizing on the philosophical aspects of bureaucracy. We are emphasizing on the philosophical aspect. And when he says that the nature of the states gets reflected in the nature of the bureaucracy, or bureaucracy, the nature of the bureaucracy echoes the nature of the state, the spiritual angle, right? Imaginary state, if you look at the idea of imaginary state, why Weber is actually talking about it, he is taking a critical view. sorry, Marx is talking about this because it's a Marxist critique of Weber. Marxist critique of Weber. Because Hegel gives this idea that bureaucracy is the spiritualism of the state. Bureaucracy is the spiritualism of the state. So, at the core remains the same idea because it is the critical idea given by Marx. So, we'll talk about the dysfunctionalities of bureaucracy because Marx or the Marxian critique is practically referring to that. Okay, bureaucracy is the second order cloak. At the original level, it is Hegel. At the original level, it is Hegel. Okay, so this is a philosophical critique of bureaucracy, labeling bureaucracy as self-centered, alienated, self-centered, alienated. Okay, so for Marx, bureaucracy is not just the executive arm or the implementation arm of the state policy, but it embodies the state itself. But it embodies the state itself, becoming the imaginary state within it. You can use the deep state argument, though not very correct in this, but to understand, you can use the deep state argument, the state within the state. Okay, so Marx argues that bureaucracy represents the alienation of political power. Instead of being an instrument of the people, it acquires an independent character in itself. It acquires an independent character in itself. So rather than citizens' interest, they serve their own interest. So while bureaucracy might claim neutrality, impersonality, rationality, in fact, it is serving its own interest and interest of a particular section of the society, representing the spirit of the state. That the, Marx says what? That the bureaucracy has been created to exploit the society, to serve certain interests. This is what we mean by this phrase. Okay, this is a Marxian critique. Imaginary state. Okay. So Hegel, Marx, Weber, and these three are dancing together in this particular question. In this particular question. Okay. So it was a caution, it was a warning of sorts given by Marx that the bureaucracy should not become a state, it should remain the instrument in the hands of people. Understood this? Understood, friends? Okay. So this completes section A of the first paper. And if you see, we haven't gone to beyond unit 6. So that is again a learning. That nothing from 6, 7, nothing from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 came here directly. Right? We were using administrative ethics and other parts. Alright. Now, let us move to 5A. We are back to 10 marker. Compulsory questions. E-advocacy. Model of e-governance can facilitate democratization of public policy making. So much stuff. So much stuff. Now, can you tell me which unit does this question belongs to? Anybody? Anybody online? Hmm. Which unit? See, the key is here. If you are not able to deduce the unit, you are gone. Because you'll never be able to demarcate territory. You will be talking general talk about e-governance and public policy. Look at the question. Look at the words very carefully. Can facilitate, that means can bring about democratization of public policy making. Right? That is the manifestation part. What is the concept part? E-governance. So e-governance, techniques of administrative improvement. The secondary role will be played by public policy. What are we looking at public policy? Are we looking at e-governance through public policy in this question? Or are we looking public policy through e-governance? Public policy through e-governance. Therefore, we'll slot this question in techniques for administrative improvement. The public policy will play the secondary part, and within that public policy, the democratic policy making. That means participatory models of public policy making. आ गया? Right? You can now draw certain ideas that through this we'll talk about. Then e-advocacy is merely a mechanism to garner support, to advocate for a particular cause, to garner support, to advocate for a particular cause. Okay? Again, bring out Habermas, public sphere argument, right? Dendart's new public service approach, Dendart and Dendart, new public service approach. Okay? Examples, mygov.in is one example from the government space. Then you have so many other public, internet based platforms which raise petition, garner votes. You would have also got the messages. Okay, sometimes the spam messages actually come, social media campaigns, etc., that are carried out regarding a particular cause. Okay, so how e-advocacy through e-governance can enhance the participation in public policy. This is the moot point. So now look at the concept of e-governance. E-governance provides what? Accessibility, availability, affordability, viability, scalability, flexibility, adaptability. All of this. So the provision or enhancement of all of this, doesn't it provide more ease for citizens to participate as a root concept? Forget about everything else. What does e-governance bring to the table? Accessibility, availability, viability, affordability, flexibility, reliability, all these things it is bringing to the table. So when it is bringing to the table, built on that e-advocacy, and then through that the public policy, online petitions, public consultations of draft laws, okay, social media as an advocacy tool, and then the challenges you will talk about: digital divide, okay, uh, creation of echo chambers, creation of fake narratives, creation of anti-national narratives, elite capture of the discourse. All those will be the challenges. Now remember, if you are going to write the challenges in a very regular format, it will be like notes. Okay, so always link them with e-advocacy and public policy. Don't just write digital divide. Challenge is digital divide. Okay, inhibits the the participation of people in public policy making, weakening the e-advocacy or underpowering the e-advocacy. Write it like this. Then the question becomes very simple. So at the heart of it, it is what? Benefits and challenges of e-governance. On one side, you are taking the reference of e-advocacy. On the effect side, you are taking the reference of Public policy. If I change this public policy making with the law making, decision making, will the logic change? No. It is just the context that has changed. So your answer should be contextual. Understood? It is name material. So therefore the question is not on public policy. Alright. Moving on. Neoliberal policies have enhanced the scope and opportunities of taxation for government. Neoliberal policies have enhanced the taxation. Taxation obviously government does. Okay, so this, I mean, if we omit this also, it will hardly make a difference. Now, if you look at this particular question, easily we are looking at financial administration, monetary and fiscal policy. Okay, rather we are talking about fisc, not monetary. Okay, since the topic in the syllabus is monetary and fiscal policy, I'm saying monetary and fiscal policy, but the question is based on the fisc argument, because taxation is largely a fisc domain. It's a fiscal domain. Okay, understood? Examples are plenty: VAT, service tax, GST, etc. Why neoliberalism? Now, because you see, how am I tracing the question backwards? I've come to neoliberalism at the end. What are the characteristics of neoliberalism? Come on. What is neoliberalism? The interpenetration of new ideas, opening up of markets, liberalization, privatization. This is how it gets manifested, right? Market led model, minimal state intervention, deregulation, globalization. This is all the manifestation of the neoliberal idea. So it leads to what? It leads to essentially a public sphere which was hitherto dominated by the state. But with the coming up of liberalism, neoliberalism, the state is taking a back seat. It is a minimal state. So it is leaving the space for other players to interact, carry out activities. And those carrying out of activities give us potential for more economic activity. Therefore, more taxes. Now come into indicative policy making. Link it with plans and priorities. Paper 2. Okay, tax sops, tax reforms, because the root is fiscal policy. This is why it is giving more scope and opportunities, because newer services are coming up, newer economic activities are taking place, right? Right now we are talking about online gaming industry has come up. Recently we were talking about taxing the online gaming, so new opportunity. See, you have the ready-made examples. Okay, for time and again people have been talking about taxing the betting, making betting legal, and that is where you will come up with the practical examples of goods and services tax, right? Corporate tax and all those things, because earlier you had limited private enterprise, you never had the space for private enterprise to flourish, so you had a limited scope of taxation. Neoliberal has opened up the space. The government has taken a back seat. So that crowding out effect of too much interfering state has slided back. Okay. Logic and concept. Okay. So it widened, the neoliberal policy basically widens the fiscal canvas. But at the same time, that taxation should not be exploitative or hoardistic in characteristic, that okay, now we have expanded, let us tax much. Okay, it should be prudent. It should be progressive, right? So with these words, you will have to sort of balance the entire argument. ठीक है, scope तो बड़ा है. The scope has expanded, but we should not be, as a state, should not be reckless in its taxation. See how implementation and application oriented this question was from financial administration. Not an easy one, let me tell you. Next one. Policy analysis process is limited if possible outcomes and alternate potential policies are neglected. Simple idea. If you do not know what your outcome is, how will you analyze the policy? How will you analyze the policy? The argument is pretty simple. We are referring to the unit of public policy, process of public policy making. Within that, the process of policy analysis. Refer to the policy cycle. Refer to the policy cycle. Now, here use incrementalism, bounded rationality, Lindblom, science of muddling through, Itzioni, mixed scanning, okay, and all those things as the conceptual backbone, as the conceptual backbone, and outcome based policy making, okay, outcome based policy making, right? So not pretty much to do, right? Just use the models. For example, use the rational model, which considers the policy as an ideal world, that all outcomes and alternatives should be examined before a decision is made. So what is the fulcrum within this? The rational model, right? You see, is limited if they are neglected. What does rational model say? That all the alternatives should be examined first. Okay, but Simon says that the rationality cannot be absolute, it has to be bounded, and therefore through that you are bringing Lindblom's incrementalism. Lindblom's incrementalism. Okay, neglecting that might cause certain harms, justifying the rational approach, right? Demonetization can be an example. Demonetization can be example. Therefore, as a synthesis, makes this candy. Therefore, as a synthesis, makes this candy. So this is how you will use. Okay, but you will talk about that. The vehicle for policy analysis is only if outcome mapping has been done and all the alternatives have been considered. Neelam, David Easton in which question? David Easton in which question? Okay, this one. Oh, right. You can use. You can use. No issues. All right. Let's move to the next one. Values and ethics in civil services are shaped by global practices and trends. Explain. Okay. A very thin veneer of impact of globalization and CPA, but at the core, it is personnel administration, administrative ethics, administrative ethics. Simple, straightforward question. How it is shaping the, it is getting shaped by the global practices and trends. Global practices and trends. Nolan Committee, UK, OECD framework for public service ethics, Dendhart, citizen centric administration, right? practical manifestations. How the values and ethics are getting shaped, let us say, through global academic developments coming up of governance, good governance. It is shaping values, right? Transparency, accountability, participation, responsiveness. All of these are also values. It is shaping the character of the administration, the civil service, right? So one on the theoretical lens, other practical, Nolan Committee, OECD framework. So you have now two strands to work with. Okay. Now how they are shaping, right? Codes of conduct come up. This is the manifestation, impact that is happening. Whistleblower protection is coming up. RTI is coming up. Okay. Code of ethics, conflict of interest, scenarios and how to avoid them. This is how it is coming up, how it is manifesting. Ombudsman, for example, right? So there would be agents of change globally in terms of the theoretical development and the practical manifestation, Nolan Committee, OECD framework, public service ethics, and all those things. And the practical manifestation. Very simple, straightforward question. Again, this reminds me of the time when I was repeatedly emphasizing upon the administrative ethics idea. Okay. So, to begin with, you'll have to talk about how the civil services conduct is not only shaped by the national value system or the national constitutions, but increasingly in an increasing interconnected world, it is getting shaped by globalization, best practices being adopted in cross-cultural contexts. And this is how you will set the stage for the two: theory, practical, Nolan Committee, and okay. And then the domestic one, you can give a reference to the second ARC. Then you can talk about how Freedom of Information Act inspired the RTI Act, right? All those things, public service values, how Citizens Charter in UK inspired the Citizens Charter in India. There can be any and many examples to this. Further, economic development alone is not a sufficient component of women development and empowerment. Very simple question. We are looking at the unit of development dynamics, women development and self-help group movement wala head, that head. Now, here the difficulty lies in the easy character of this question. Economic development is not alone. Then what else is needed? You will have to use the capability approach. Women in development, women and development. Okay, all those things to justify the demand, because economic development we have seen, for example, in the Arab world, we have seen in the past 20-30 years rapid economic development has taken place, but are there women developed? No. Saudi Arabia only recently, a few years ago, allowed women to drive. I mean, can you imagine? So economic development is not equal to women empowerment. It might not be a natural correlation. It's not sufficient. So why is it not sufficient and what needs to be done will be the subject matter of your answer. And the conceptual bottom will be women and development, women in development, and gender and development. These are the concepts that you study in the gender studies and capability approach of Dr. Amartya Sen. You can quote that capability approach, and then you can talk about how it represents in under empowerment: political representation, economic participation, literacy, susceptibility to violence, security concerns, okay, disproportionate unpaid work that they do. Okay, and how do you improve upon it? Then to improve, you have legal measures, institutional measures, social measures. Okay, National Commission for Women, etc., etc. You can take those as examples. All right, चलिए ठीक है. You can take the example of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, all those things. You can add them as well. Sixth question. Riggs Industria interdependent economy is a precursor for some features of postmodern public administration. Postmodern public administration. So, if you look at this particular question, we are looking at, because Riggs has come into the picture. Unit is CPA, Comparative Public Administration. Topic is very simple. Rigsian model and its critique. Rigsian model and its critique. So this way, if you see, the question is very straight. But it's a 20 marker and it is focusing just on the industria idea which was given by Riggs. Prismatic agraria industria typology. And another conceptual argument here is the postmodernist perspective of public administration. The postmodernist perspective of public administration. So basically we have to talk about industria. It will have certain features. Okay. Postmodern has certain features and how this was a precursor for those features. Okay. Now, if you look at industria, industria comes from the agraria industria typology, and industria represent, or the industria model was representative of the industrial societies such as the United States. What is the characteristic? High levels of differentiation, specialization, right? Functional interdependence, functional interdependence, and secular rationality. So that means we are looking at the interdependency, secularity of rationality, that means it is not colored or biased with some angle, and the great degree of differentiation or specialization. Now, if you look at the postmodern public administration, it is postmodern. That means we are looking at a phenomena that gained currency in 80s and 90s, rejecting the universalistic, classical and behavioral ideas and stressing upon the pluralism, networks, discourse, multiple rationalities. So in this way, if you compare the Rixian industria idea, it is also saying that no institution can be understood in isolation. There is an ecology of interdependence, right? So whether the manifestation, cooperative federalism, public-private partnerships, network governance, all of those which are getting manifested in the postmodernist era through governance, good governance, is nothing but similarity with the industry. However, there was a difference. Industria was conceptualized by Riggs with a positivist, functionalist worldview. We criticize Riggs, no, in CPA, that his positivist underpinning is problematic, that he is positivistic in his approach. Okay. So that is problematic. Whereas postmodernism is rooted in contextuality, not in positivism. Not in positivism. So that is where the differences is. Next one. The role and responsibility of the state in the development process has been overemphasized and given undue importance. Critically examined. Basically, you have to criticize the role of the state. Simple question based on development dynamics unit, and the topic is state versus market debate. State versus market debate. State versus market debate. Then the sub strand will be, because we are talking about the present era, we will have to take or sort of give a brushstroke of LPG, importance of liberalization or impact of liberalization, privatization and globalization. Okay, you can use Buchanan's critique of the James Buchanan, the critique of the failure of government, the range from the license permit PSU centric Raj to the modern liberalized framework in terms of delivering goods and services, to justify that the state or the state centric model of development was not very sustainable, was not very productive, rather not sustainable, not very productive. Therefore, the state in the development has been overemphasized and given undue importance due to certain limitations of the state. You know the limitations of the state in terms of its capacities, action, uh, its abilities, manpower, bureaucracy, right? You can use prismatic society argument, rigs, and bring in the bureaucratic inefficiency, right? Example, license permit, Raj can be again an example, and the neoliberal shift which happens under the Washington consensus and a wave of LPG that brought out a counter view to the state-led development model, However, you will emphasize that state continues to remain important, because the state has to be there for people for whom nobody is there. Also, in times of crisis, example COVID, were private health companies providing us vaccine for free? No, it was the state. So, for equity, for justice, for social justice, state continues to run so many schemes, Ujjwala, Jal Jeevan Mission, Pradhan Mantri Awas, etc. So all those will be example. Okay, so the best fit would be an enabling state, a facilitator, acting as a facilitator. So using heavy from the idea of governance, good governance, but looking at it, or seeing it from the development dynamics perspective and state versus market debate. So it is not, when we study state versus market debate, we say no, it should not be state versus market, it should be state and market, and based on various sectors the proportion can differ to bring out the best results. Very simple question that way. So see, if you see these set of questions, this one, this one, very easy. You could have chosen, I mean, people could have chosen that and could have scored better marks versus the difficult ones or the tricky ones. Next one. Affirmative action for equal opportunity, basically we are talking about reservation, is a cornerstone in recruitment to public services. Discuss it in global context. Discuss it in global context. Now clearly we are looking at the unit of personnel administration and the topic is recruitment. Now they have given it a twist, that we are looking at this in the global context and affirmative action, which 99.9% of you might not know beyond India. So here the challenge is not the lack of understanding. Here the challenge is lack of scope of understanding. Because none of you bothered to actually look at the phenomena of reservations beyond India. And that is where the challenge lies. At a conceptual level, you will be using John Rawls' theory of justice. Okay. Mosher, who has been asked previously as well, Mosher, active versus passive reservation. Okay. And the dynamics between the affirmative action, representative bureaucracy, and equality and equality. Okay. So even in United States, there are executive orders which mandate affirmative action. South Africa, Employment Equity Act for blacks, women and disabled. India, obviously you know, SC, ST, OBC, women, EWS, so many things are there. Okay. Again, you can draw in Dr. Amartya Sen's capability approach to justify the affirmative action. To justify the affirmative action. Because the equal opportunity can only happen in a highly unequal society through the affirmative action. So you want to do this because you want to correct the inequality or the disadvantages in the structures and creating a more representative bureaucracy or civil service. Okay, that the bureaucracy represents the society. It does not represent only the elite of the society. It does not represent only the class of the society, but the mass of the society. Okay, and even scholars like Waldo, because you can invoke Waldo here, see, very intelligently. NPA, Waldo, emphasis on social equity. बिंदास लेकर आने का इसको, I mean, without any fear you can bring in Waldo. Okay, the examples I have given you: South Africa, United States, India, and the theoretical backbone. Yes, there are certain challenges. This affirmative action should not come at the cost of the efficiency and effectiveness of the civil services in realizing the goals or the national goals. Okay, it's not a privilege, but a constitutional and ethical necessity, and has to be tempered with a test of efficiency. All right, next one. Question number 7. So we are on to the second last question of the test. Any queries? Any queries there? Yes, you could have used NPA in criticizing the excessive role of state. You could have used. The objective of LPG and of NPM was to limit government functions. I will write here, criticize TPA, and reduce public expenditure, bring in efficiency, effectiveness and economy, and reduce public expenditure. However, both functions and expenditures have increased. But the result is what? Functions have increased and expenditure has increased. How and why? This is our question. Now you are looking at LPG, NPM, all of this. All of this is linking to the unit of introduction. Paper 1. Topic is NPM and LPG. A hybrid sort of a topic. Okay, and how and why it has brought about this idea. Okay, use Osborne and Gabler for the steering idea, steering versus rowing, and then use Hood, Christopher Hood, who talks about certain paradoxes in the NPM, who talks about certain paradoxes in the NPM. Now, when you look at this particular question, the reforms that were carried out as part of the impact of LPG, those reforms were largely designed out of the NPM philosophy, characterized by limited role of the state, promotion of market, private enterprise, deregulation, integration with other market, and this rollback on paper was characterized by a shrunk state, reduced but effective government, reduced expenditure. But in reality, the counter has happened. How? Theoretically, privatization would reduce the burden of the state, right? Because you are transferring the enterprises to the private hands. Deregulation was supposed to cut the red tape, delay, reduce bureaucratic interference, and the managerial reforms promised efficiency. However, contrary has happened. Why? Because this has given rise to a regulatory state. Over regulation has happened. Now the government is practically regulating everything. You have demand for independent regulators. For example, in India, TRAI, SEBI, IRDA, right? So the state marks a re-entry through the regulation. And this regulation was then further extended, the idea of state penetration or the re-penetration of the state. Dispute resolution. You had to create tribunals, specific tribunals for companies, for trade disputes, for telecom. And along with this progression, the demise of the welfare state and the coming up of the NPM, the gaps between have and have not has widened. The gap between India and Bharat has widened. So that led to the coming up of what? Rights based approach. And this right based approach again burdened the state to provide for them. Manarega, right to information, right to education, thereby increasing the fiscal burden. Globalization created new responsibilities. There was no internet, nothing to regulate. Now you have to do. There was no climate change or world climate project as such, big way. But now you have to do. There was no pandemic like COVID. Now you have to do. There were no sustainable development goals as such. Now you have to do. Right? So while NPM reduced the direct role of the state as a service provider, rowing gets reduced, but it has expanded the role of the state as a regulator, facilitator, arbitrator, coordinator, guarantor, steering. So the LPG and NPM did not alter the weight of the state. It only altered the distribution of that weight. Okay. It only transformed it, reoriented it. Right? So this paradox is essentially not a failure, but a transformation for the state to work in public interest, which is its sole responsibility as per the present day realities, demands of the modern society. ठीक है? Next, 7B. The basis of comparative study of public administration has evolved from institutional approach, basically the evolution of the CPA itself, from institutional approach to the contemporary politico-economic process approach. Have all these approaches enabled the development of theory of CPA? Justify your answer. A question in which you have to do a lot. So we are looking at CPA, no prizes for guessing that, but the current status of CPA. Let me give you a very small example. Okay, let me try and explain you this. Initially, CPA is a post World War II phenomenon, right? The idea of comparing administrations is not new. Wilson did it with Europe. But CPA as a methodology comes in the post World War II phenomena, largely in and around the development administration. It emerges. So Europe was destroyed and Marshall Plan was brought about to build the Europe. And there were, many countries, tens of countries that got newly independent. They were there initial years when CPA actually comes about, because if you see, Riggs will study all these countries, Thailand, India, and this. What was the basis of CPA then? That what worked for West will work for the rest. Right? This was the basis. So CPA was ethnocentric, institutional driven. Right? Whereas progressively, the CPA becomes more contextual and not ethnocentric. That means rooted in political and economic processes. And this CPA, how is that evolved? The present status. This has a reverse throughput as well. So it is not something, the traditional CPA, the old CPA, that the rest will have to learn from the West. No, the West can also learn from the rest. So it was unidirectional. Now it is bidirectional. This is the core idea. Now you will obviously have to go that have all these approaches enabled the development of the theory. Has it developed into a theory? Theory means working in almost all the conditions, universal character. So initially, to begin with, it was not universal, it was ethnocentric. But the new CPA that has evolved is far more universal. So in that sense, even if it is not the end of theory building, it has certainly passed the post where the beginning of theory building has ended. Okay, so this is the sort of the core concept. Now as the core content, you will have the approaches to CPA in your notes, books, materials. And when you look at this approaches of CPA, institutional approach, structural functional approach, political economic approach, ecological approach, neo-institutional approach, you will be using Farrell Heddy, Almond and Verba political culture to justify the socio-political aspect. Okay, all those things, and how the basically policy etc. is behaving on the ground as part of this new CPA that has come about. Now obviously there is content with regards to these various approaches, institutional approach, structural functional approach, but you will have to modify that content. The core thread is this. Okay, modify as in mold the content as per the demand of the question, right? Understood this? Understood, friends? Anji, understood? All right. Moving on to the next one. Can competency mapping linked to career development incentivize civil service commitment to effective service delivery? Basically, importance of competency mapping in career advancement or career development. That is the topic. You have the career advancement as a topic. Okay, and basically the question is focusing on the mechanics of that career advancement. Unit is personnel administration. Unit is personnel administration. Career advancement, you will have to bring in the sort of elements of uh, training. Okay, elements of training into the picture. Okay, now if you see writing this particular answer, you will have to reflect on certain key concepts: career advancement, promotion, training being some of those central concepts. At the same time, service motivation, service motivation, performance appraisal systems, you know, 360-degree peer reviews. Examples can be Project Sparrow in India. I gave a question on Project Sparrow in my test series. Okay. So what do you mean by competency mapping? Competency mapping as a concept would mean the systematic identification of knowledge, skills and attitudes required for effective performance of a job. So once you have this knowledge, skills and attitudes mapped and linked to career advancement, whether this suits the job and you perform well, then only your career will advance. So it is in a way right man at the right job. How will you link it? You will link it to career advancement through training, promotion, postings, thereby toggling with the authority, discretion, power, responsibility. Okay, and therefore it can transform the motivation of the civil services to bring about effective service delivery. So the traditional system, if you see, was based on what? Seniority, career progression, right? But the modern approach is not seniority but skills, the competency mapping. You can bring in Chris Argyris, okay, who talks about organizational learning. You can give examples from Second Administrative Reforms Commission report for a competency based HR management. You can use the recent developments around Mission Karmyogi, IGOT platform. Okay, all these things to justify this answer. Okay, easy. This was pretty easy. Next. So we are on to the last question of paper 1. The effectiveness of civil society in development process is only when state institutions are receptive to inputs of the civil society organization discussed. Seems like a GS question. Seems like a GS question. Now, if you look at this particular question, where are we situating this question in the syllabus? Hmm? Where are we situating this question in the syllabus? What is the unit? Accountability and control. Role of civil society organizations is there or not? Media, interest group, voluntary organization. And while this is the main idea, the secondary strand is development dynamics. The secondary strand is development dynamics. And within this, we'll have to focus on role of civil society in development. That brings into the picture unit 1, governance and good governance. That brings into the picture unit 1, governance and good governance. Now, if you see here, you can use Robert Putnam social capital argument. Okay. Ostrom's polycentricity, Tocqueville's associations and democracy, participatory approach, participatory approach. Okay. So to begin with, we'll have to talk about how, as per the modern paradigm, civil society is a key player in the overall governing process. And to that end, the civil society plays a significant role in development. However, the effectiveness of its role is dependent upon the state and its willingness, how it provides open up avenues, platforms for civil society to actively engage for to bring about development. Okay. So it is because only the state has the legitimacy, state has the authority. So when the state is receptive, the civil society plays a transformational role. RTI is one example. Okay. Sorry. Lokpal, RTI, matlab, Lokpal obviously did not receive much success. So I would not give that example. But the point is RTI was very successful. And it can only happen when the state is receptive. It gives platforms, it enables the civil society participation. Now see the roles of the civil society as a facilitator. Look at NRLM, look at various government programs, right to education, Pratham, an NGO collaborating with the state to bring about development in the education dimension. So in this manner, you will have to intersperse between concepts, arguments and examples. So this making this creative mix is the key to this answer, because unless you do that, unless you bring in those conceptual elements, your answer will become GSish. If you give only theory and not examples, then your answer will become hollow. If you give only example and not theory, again hollow. Okay. So I mean this is one example. Self-help group is another example, whereas a non-receptive state becomes a closed state. It undermines democracy. Excessive regulation, restrictive practices curtail the functioning, autonomy and potency of these very civil society organizations. Okay. So civil, for example, Tocqueville says that civil associations are like the schools of democracy. Gramsci says that civil society is a site of counter hegemonic struggle to counter the state hegemony. Use new public governance, use good governance and all those ideas to bring about the rationale of the civil society here. Okay. Civil society on its alone cannot do it. The state has to provide. Okay, as part of governance, good governance, we also see that state continues to remain the linchpin of the system because it only has the legitimacy, authority, power. It frames the law. Other players play by that law. All right, next one. Second last question. Evaluate the role and scope of tacit knowledge and personal experience as an important source of knowledge in policy making process. Tacit knowledge, personal experience. Do you recall any scholar wherein we talked about the importance of intuition? Wherein we talked about the importance of intuition. Clearly, we are referring here to the unit of public policy and the models of public policy. Heuristic approach to public policy, heuristic approach to decision making, double loop learning, right? So all those conceptual elements will be utilized here. So you have to put in context very clearly that public policy is not only a technical function, which is about modeling, data, rationality. It is also a human process involving intuition, experience, and tacit knowledge. Okay? Tacit knowledge. Whether you talk about then use in support, bounded rationality, that the decision makers do not consider all the alternatives. They consider only the alternatives that they know through heuristics, through experience, through judgment. Lindblom in incrementalism is again referring to what? Muddling through. Charles Lindblom in incrementalism, muddling through, where you make adjustment, constant adjustment based on the previous experiences. Argres's organizational learning, organizational memory idea. Okay. For example, you can use how ASHA workers in the grassroots are far more aware about the problems of the women regarding maternal health, regarding child care initiatives. So tacit knowledge enhances the contextuality of the policy and take it at a broader public sphere away from the board or meeting rooms into the operational reality. It tempers that idealistic approach of policy making through reality. Make it adaptable, flexible. Okay. However, it has limitations. Subjectivity, personal bias, distorted judgment, right? All those things. And therefore, to marry the rationality, tacit knowledge, to provide more rationality, you are talking about participative policy making. You are talking about participative policy making. It is a vital source nonetheless, right? But has to be integrated with the formal aspect of policy making. Purely formal might not be implementable. Purely tacit again might not yield the desired results. You have to marry the two. This would be the balanced conclusion kind that you will come up with. Okay? All right. Moving on to the last question of paper 1. The efficacy of management aid tools depends on the purpose and appropriateness of tools and techniques. Explain with example. Perhaps the simplest and the most boring question of the entire paper. Because when we are looking at the management aid tools, we are looking at techniques of administrative improvement, tools like network analysis, MIS, right, PERT, all those things we are talking about. Okay, total quality management, Six Sigma. Okay, so here how will you look at the efficacy? Efficacy does not always mean efficient. Okay, efficacy, how effective it is. It might not always mean the most economic one, right? If I today need to buy an aircraft, fighter aircraft, I can buy a Rafale or I can buy a Su-57, but my own ecosystem won't develop unless I work on AMCA. This is just an example. So it might not be very cost effective. Initially, the per unit cost might be higher vis-a-vis what is available off the shelf, but I will develop my capabilities. So it might not be the most economic or financially efficient option, but it is the effective option. So here you can use Drucker, who talks about effectiveness versus efficiency. Herbert Simon, bounded rationality again, as the conceptual backbone to sort of justify. Now you can take any or many of the things, but since it's a 15 marker, I would recommend take up at least 3 or 4. Okay, take up the usual ones because everybody will take up those only unless you have something radical in your mind. PERT, CPM, MIS, okay, organization and methods. Simple question. The efficacy of management tool depends on the purpose and appropriateness, where which tool is used. When you read these tools, you have clearly things in your notes. Okay. For example, in project management, you have the CPM and the PERT, whereas the project coordination in terms of tracking, monitoring, providing for data driven decision making, you have MIS, right, as a better tool that you cannot do for from CPM, that you cannot do from CPM. Organization and methods is used to distribute functions, responsibilities. So clearly you have different purpose and appropriateness of tools and techniques. You can take examples: Delhi Metro, Manrega related dashboard, right, CP grams, other examples you can take. Fairly easy question. Okay, so we have to cement this point that these are management aid tools. They are not the solutions, they are the means to solutions. It depends on how you use them. Okay, when the purpose actually aligns with the administrative context, when the purpose aligns with the administrative context. Okay, so with this, we have come to the end of discussion of paper 1. I hope you had fun because I had fun curating this for you. Uh, See, there can be some dimensions which might be an afterthought. You can use them, but the moot point here is to understand where the spine of the question is, hold that spine and weave the narrative around it. So whatever concepts, whatever arguments that we have discussed today, they might not be the only argument. So I would ask you to remember Simon in this, that I am also bounded by rationality. I also have a bounded rationality. What we have tried to do is provide cogent and coherent arguments to these answers. There is no limit to creativity. There can be more arguments, and there are more arguments. Some of them I know, but the point is they have not been shared for the reason that the marks will lay in simplifying the answers, not in complicating them. All right. Also, just in case, after this session, if you have any supplementary queries, feel free to reach out to me either on Telegram or comment, you know, uh, uh, in the mentor box, or simply contact the office to reach out to me, right? Any queries, last minute queries, if somebody has, yes or no? You guys have something to ask? You? Something to ask? All right then. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.